It's been 6 months since I got my pacemaker implanted, and I'm going to talk to you about the two problems I've had with it during that time. Welcome to the Cyborg Vlog. As I've talked to you about in previous videos, I had the pacemaker implanted in December, and I went to the 10-day wound check, and everything went fine with that. But after that, they scheduled me for a pacemaker clinic, which was the first time I would be going to my regular cardiologist's office to have the pacemaker interrogated. And this pacemaker clinic really was just a fancy word for a day that they bring in all the technicians that can operate the laptops, the specialized laptops, one for each manufacturer. You know, there's Biotronic, Medtronic, a couple other ones I forget, but they have all the laptops set up, and basically the people that are in there for the pacemaker clinic go in one at a time, and they pair you up with the appropriate laptop for your pacemaker's manufacturer, and they take the readings off of it, and they give you some feedback. And at that point, for the first pacemaker clinic, everything went fine for me. The one thing I really don't like about the pacemaker clinics is everybody's there. It's a very busy day, and the doctor's office gets backed up, and the waiting room is really full, and I feel kind of bad on those days. You know, there's a lot of people in there, and me being one of the younger ones, I always feel like I should give up my seat because I don't want to be sitting there playing on my phone, and the 90-year-old lady that's walking in with her walker struggling to get in the door, you know, doesn't have a seat. So most of the time when I go to the pacemaker clinics, me and a couple other people, we just resolve ourselves that we're just going to stand awkwardly on the wall and wait for our turn. At the end of the first pacemaker clinic, they said everything looked good, and I hadn't really ever felt the pacemaker pacing on its own those first few weeks, and I thought everything was operating normally, and they looked at it, they said everything was fine, and so they scheduled me for 4 months out for my next pacemaker check. And you know, like I said, everything was fine. I didn't even notice I had the thing, besides a little discomfort around the scar area still. And that kind of changed one Friday about 6 weeks in, when I was at home. It was after work. My wife and I were watching Game of Thrones, and we were just sitting there on the couch, and then all of a sudden I feel something happening in the chest. You know, I feel the flutter. I feel a real rapid heartbeat. Like, I knew the pacemaker was pacing, but it was pacing at about double what it should have been that I thought. And of course that kind of freaks me out. And I have like a little rush of, you know, the fight or flight response, you know, a little rush of adrenaline. And yeah, I'm like, well, why the heck did I do that? But it was for about 10 seconds. And then I thought, okay, everything's fine, it's back to normal. You know, it must be doing its job. That seemed weird. I never felt it do that before. And so I go back to watching the show. Things go back to normal. I'm resting again. I get relaxed again. And then it does it again for a few seconds. And, you know, I get a little more concerned. And then it does it a third time that night while we're watching TV. And you know, I'm thinking, wow, this is weird. Why is it doing this so much? Is something going on? Is my heart weaker now? Why would I go 6 weeks without ever noticing it doing this, and then all of a sudden it starts? And that was kind of a major concern for me, and that was the first time I'd ever felt it pace. And I decided to go ahead and give the cardiologist's office a call the following Monday. They didn't really seem too concerned about it. They asked if I wanted to move my appointment up instead of waiting. You know, at that point it would have been 3.5 months to get it checked out. I said yes, I'd like to come in sooner. And they had an opening I think it was about a week and a half after I first had that event. And they said, you're fine. You have the home monitor at home. If anything was going wrong, they'd be able to tell. And they haven't had a report from the manufacturer to say that anything abnormal was going on. So they told me just go ahead and come in a couple weeks and talk to the cardiologist. So in the following days, while I was waiting for that appointment, I did notice that I'd get that rapid pacing every once in a while when I was in an inactive state, when I was sitting down at work, or if I was at home in the evening, usually getting ready to go to bed if I was watching TV. And so one time when I noticed it, I put on a little pulse monitor, the one that fits on your finger, and it showed me that my heart rate was just about 50 beats a minute, 59 to 60 beats a minute. It was at the low threshold that they originally set the pacemaker for. By default, they set that at 60 beats per minute, and if you go below that, it'll give you a pace. Well, that really wasn't the problem I was needing the pacemaker for, but that was something they had set by default. And it happened a few times, maybe once or twice a day. Sometimes when I'm driving home, basically when I'm in a low activity kind of state, when I'm sitting, driving, at work. And my solution to kind of work around this, because it bothered me that it was pacing rapidly like that, part of my solution was I would just get up and walk around and try to keep my heart rate above 60 beats per minute. And it did this on and off until I went back to the cardiologist. So when I finally got into the cardiologist and at the next pacemaker clinic, again, it was busy. They were running about an hour behind, and there was standing room only. And the cardiologist, he has a couple dogs that roam around his office, a golden retriever and a Pomeranian. And he said, "I'm sorry, you're running behind." And he said, "I'm going to have to release the dogs." And basically what he does is they go out to comfort and entertain the people in the waiting room while they're waiting for their appointment. So when I finally did get in there and they hooked me up, the technician went through it. He looked at all the different readings, and he told me, "Yeah, you're pacing, at this percentage." And he said everything looks pretty much normal. And as he's continuing to do the checks, I mentioned to him about this rapid heartbeat, and he said, "That's kind of strange. You shouldn't be noticing like that. If anything, it should be once in a while you might feel a chest thump." And basically what he did was he went through some different scenarios to try to get it tuned right. So he said, "Does it feel like this?" And he set the pacemaker to start pacing me at 80 beats a minute. I said, "Well, a little bit, but not really." And then he did it at 100, and so yeah, it's a little closer to what it feels like. And then he paced me at 120 beats, and I said, "Well, that's the closest that I felt to when this happens." And he's strange. He said that's a little strange. You're not doing anything. They thought, like, based on my activity, if I was doing something strenuous, if I was doing yard work with like some hedge trimmers or some other device, they were trying to get to the bottom of why it was doing that. And then finally he looks at one last screen on the laptop that has all the diagnostic information from the pacemaker, and he tells me, "Oh, you've been having pacemaker-induced tachycardia." And I said, "Well, first, that sounds bad. What the heck's going on with that?" And he's kind of quiet for a minute while he's looking at the stuff. And that made me think it was even more of a problem. And, I have that rush of anxiety. I think something's wrong. Anytime something starts going on with my heart, I think I'm going to, die. Like it just happens, even if I shouldn't be that worried about it, it still popped up in my mind. Well, what he finally told me was it's something they could fix. And He said that has to do with tuning of the actual pacemaker itself. So what was happening was the nerve that transmits a signal that's supposed to go from the top chamber to the bottom naturally, and that's what I kind of have problems with at night when I'm sleeping. That response is slow or non-existent, and that's why I needed the pacemaker. Well, what was happening was that nerve was actually conducting the signal back up the heart, and anytime my pacemaker would pace the bottom chamber, it would read the signal up at the probe in the top chamber. That was happening because the pacemaker has a set of default timers, and what happens is when it senses electrical activity in the top, it has a timer and it waits to see if there's electricity or electrical signal in the lower chamber, and it times that, and it keeps doing a counter for every beat. And while what was happening was it would pace the bottom chamber, and that nerve would send the signal back up, but it has what they call a refractory period where it ignores signal, and that signal moving up the nerve was going too slowly. So when it finally did get there, it was past the refractory period where the top probe would ignore any electrical signal, and it would register it as a new beat even though it wasn't a beat of the top chamber. So when it would do that, the counters would get off, and the pacemaker would think that I actually needed another pace, and it would get kind of in a feedback loop. And that's why it was going up to 120 beats a minute, because the counters were getting off. And the software on the pacemaker actually accounted for this, and they said they had an algorithm to identify these feedback loops and to break it. And that's why it would happen for 5 to 10 seconds and then stop. So I was happy they said they could fix it. And basically what he did was a couple tests where they would pace the bottom chamber and see how long it would take that signal to reach the top probe. And they adjusted my refractory period where the top probe ignores electrical activity, and by milliseconds. And my nerve was just a little bit slower than the default setting, and he adjusted that, and I was out the door. That was the end of the appointment. He said, call me if anything else happens. And from that point on, I never had that pacemaker-induced tachycardia. So that was the first problem I had with the pacemaker. And I'm happy to report I have not had that since he made the adjustment to it. So I guess the point of that story is if you feel like you're having an issue with your pacemaker, you should talk to your cardiologist about it. You should have them take a look and check it, and they can probably tune it to make things a little bit better. So the second less bothersome problem I was having with the pacemaker was that whenever my heartbeat would drop below 60 beats a minute, still at the same times, like when I'm at work sitting at the desk typing, when I'm at home relaxing or driving in the car, I would still feel that thump. It would be a dual chamber pace, and that's the one that I would really feel kind of like a take your breath away kind of like thump in the chest. And that was still happening every once in a while. And come to find out, that's actually what was causing the first problem to start. That's what was initiating the feedback loop and really there was no need for me to be paced at 60 beats per minute. So just naturally, sometimes when I'm at rest, my heart rate will go to 58, 59 beats a minute. And that's still an acceptable range for me, for my body, because I don't have problems passing out from the slow heartbeat. So I was still having these thumps every once in a while, and while it wasn't as worrisome or it didn't bother me as much as having that racing heart 128 beats per minute pace that it was doing once in a while, it'd still bother me. So the next time I went back for my regular checkup, I think it was 2 months later this time, because I had that first issue and they wanted me to come back a little bit sooner to check it out. So I talked to them about it again. I said, maybe there's nothing we can do about this, if I need it to be paced right then. So I talked to the pacemaker tech and the cardiologist, and they both talked about the reason I got the pacemaker implanted, mainly for dropping beats while I was sleeping. And I've never lost consciousness, I've never felt faint or had any other symptoms of a slow heartbeat. And they figured that some people, it's usually athletes in good shape, but their heart rates naturally go below 60 beats per minute. And because mine wasn't so severe that I was having any symptoms, they decided it would probably be okay for me to drop the lower threshold on the pacemaker for the beats per minute down to 50 beats per minute. So after they did that, I haven't even noticed the pacemaker pacing. So while I'm in my waking hours and while I'm at work, while I'm resting, basically I haven't felt a pace since that last cardiologist checkup. And again, the whole point of this is, if you're having discomfort, if you're having things that are bothering you about the pacemaker, you just need to talk to your cardiologist about it, and they can probably make adjustments to it to make it work better for your lifestyle. And since then, I've been going 2 months now, and I'm just about fully back to normal. And most of the discomfort I was telling you about in previous videos about the scar area, a lot of that has subsided now. I mean, if something still presses directly onto the pacemaker, I know it's there. I can feel it under the skin still. But as far as the seatbelt, I had an issue with the seatbelt rubbing and bothering it. That's kind of cleared up and gone away now. And I still am a little bit careful when I'm lifting things. I try not to lift things with this arm if I don't have to, even though there's not any restrictions. It's probably just an irrational fear I have of doing something or straining it, and I still kind of favor that arm. But besides that, I haven't had any further issues with the pacemaker since I talked to my cardiologist about those 2 issues I was having. And since I haven't done it so far in this video series, I figured now's as good a time as any to actually show the scar.
Nobody wants to see that.
It's about 1.25 inches long, and as you can see, it started off pretty small, but then for whatever reason the scar kind of has grown in thickness here at this end. And like I said, it's pretty much all healed. It doesn't bother me anymore, and I've been basically just adding like lotion to it to keep it. It was kind of chafing a little bit at the beginning, but since it's pretty much healed, it hasn't been bothering me anymore. And now you know what to expect from the scar. So you now, like everybody at work that talked to me about this, has seen it, whether they wanted to or not. I don't know if part of me was having to prove that I actually had the surgery, because some people were kind of skeptical when they saw me in the sling at work. They said, "What'd you do, hurt your shoulder?" And I said, "No, I had to get a pacemaker." And they're like, kind of like, "Yeah, right." And then I'd have to pull it over, show them the scar to prove it. But now you've seen it, and I will continue to make some videos throughout the next coming months and years, just to let you know if there's any updates and to know my progress. But as of right now, everything's going good, and I'm glad that I overcame my fear and went ahead and got the pacemaker implanted. And we'll talk to you next time.
Subscribe now. Resistance is futile.